Hi, Dane. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine, mate. It's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
No, thank you for joining me. I've read your book about your time living with Sid and Nancy. Um, People say there's a lot of books and documentaries about them already, but as I saw with the reviews for the book, you you go down like a different route with them and make them seem more human than the other stuff.
Yeah, thanks. But I know also in the book, I tried as much as possible to concentrate on the stuff that I was actually involved in, and not get sidetracked into writing a history of the Sex Pistols or history of punk.
Yeah.
But just to really focus in closely on the time I was around them. Pretty much 24/7.
So before we get into living with them and how that came about, what was your life like up till that point?
Um, Probably a bit chaotic. As is a theme throughout the book, I was heavily into heroin at the time, and that makes for quite a kind of complicated life. And yeah, that's by then I'd blown my straight job in publishing, and yeah, so yeah, it was, I guess it was. I was already a bit on the outside of things when all that started happening.
So with them moving in with you, can you give us a little history on how you first met them and how it built into them moving in with you?
Yes, sure. So I was living in a squat in Hampstead. It's a place that had been it's split into a lot of different flats. It wasn't the kind of squat where you had like 10 people living in the same room together. Um, yeah, and anyway, one day I was at home, so I hadn't long been out of work, and I heard the doorbell ring upstairs. So I thought, yeah, nobody else seems to be going. I'll stroll up. Yeah, and then I opened the door, and I think it was actually Nancy's hair that I recognised first. I'd seen pictures of them in the NME. Yeah, and then clocked that it was Sid. Yeah, which was strange enough. Yeah, then she said, "Is Jerry home?" And I knew straight away. And also, it was just a bit of a druggy thing. I kind of picked, clocked straight away where they were coming from, that they were looking to score. And yeah, I knew the guy they were looking for, who was a real dickhead who I didn't get on with too well. And I knew anyway he would just, he wasn't like a dealer himself. He'd just be going off to get it from somebody else and skim a bit off. And that's how I knew the person who he would be going to. So yeah, so I said, look, if you want, I can sort you out. And yes, so that was what happened. That I sort of parked them in my place while I went and did the business. And yeah, so and one way and another, they didn't leave till the next morning. And yes, and then we're back for good. Yeah, not long after that.
When they came back for good, was that to score again then, and then it just like sort of
Well, partly it was a thing they'd found a regular place to score, but they were desperate for somewhere to stay. They were living with Sid's mum, in her council flat in Dalston, and yeah, and that that obviously wasn't working too well. Yeah, Nancy and Sid's mum didn't get on at all, and she had a kind of old hippie boyfriend who they took the piss out of all the time. And yeah, so that they were desperate for a place to stay. I mean, since then, reading around, you find that the writer Nick Kent, so I had a very similar experience to me with putting them up for a bit. I think I lasted a bit longer than him, but having them turning up with their carrier bags of Pistols t-shirts and New York Dolls records and stuff.
you mentioned that you'd seen them in the NME. Um, were they how you expected them to be, or were they different?
really different. That Sid had been made out to be this very kind of cartoonish sort of figure um, in uh, in the papers, and I guess to an extent would be that's what he'd been told to play up to by McLaren and people, and yeah, I mean Nancy was just kind of hadn't really got all the bad publicity that she was to get later by then, but as I say in the book, we just kind of you know hit it off pretty much straight away. And I realised she was very smart, very very funny, and yeah, as I say, I really found that was always how I found her.
Were you a fan of the Sex Pistols at this point? Because in your book you mentioned that you actually Tony Wilson credits you for turning him on to
Y-
punk.
yes, indeed. I think that was more with the Patti Smith Horses album, and but yeah, with the Pistols, we were buying all the singles when they came out, and you tell from early on that some this was something different happening.
Did you expect them to move in with you, or was it like a shock?
Um, no, I mean it was. I was aware that it was going to be a temporary arrangement, and again they weren't with us every single night. Quite often, Sid would be away on Pistol's business, or they'd be out and end up crashing somewhere else. But yeah, and again the whole time they were with us, it was a real kind of undercurrent that Virgin kept on promising to get them a place, and that there'd always be some little thing that it would fall through at the last minute or whatever.
Just for a sort of picture for the listeners, what was your flat like so they could picture how it was?
Yeah. Okay, it was a garden flat, so yeah, it was kind of semi basement, not kind of completely underground, but yes, like I said before, you had to go up this flight of stairs to our front door and then out into the hall to the main part of the house. But yeah, so at the bottom of the stairs there was this little kind of kitchen, again with a door out into the garden. Then basically the main room, which was like the living quarters, and then over on the far side, uh, yeah, just some, loo and bathroom. Somebody who'd been in the flat when it was first squatted had built this kind of bed, large sort of bed platform over in one corner, and that's me and my girlfriend, which that was a bit like our sort of bunker for sort of me and my girlfriend, and it kind of we'd originally it had been made as a kind of bed platform, but we tried that a couple of times and it was nearly fatal. So after that, it was always sleep underneath. Yeah, and then they were on a bed the other side of the room. I did actually once draw a little kind of map of the room in a kind of cartoon way, which ideally it would be great if it had gone into the book, but we couldn't run to photos or illustrations, unfortunately.
So, what would it when they've moved in and you're living with your girlfriend and Sid and Nancy? What would a typical day be like?
Uh, Getting up, making coffee. Yeah, Jenny and I both had a methadone script at the time, so it would usually be one of us would go down to the chemist to pick up with Sid and Nancy. It would depend on whether they'd got any gear left. Yes, and then it would, the whole sort of scoring thing would start after that. First, did they have enough money? And then so the guy who was dealing upstairs, there was a real rule: that you couldn't go up there before sort of 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, or he'd get really fucked off, and so it'd be like so you had to sort of try to kind of manage and placate them, say, okay, right, I'll go up in half an hour, but it's it's not a no, it isn't a good move just to go up early. Yes, and yes, then after that we just sit around, a lot of cigarette smoking, a lot of coffee drinking, quite a bit of sometimes listening to music, but quite a bit of zoning out to daytime TV, which, as I say, wasn't particularly my thing, and in the end, used to really get on my nerves. But yeah, and then generally as the afternoon went on, Sid would usually have some reason to go uptown to the West End to the Glitter Best offices, either on Pistol's business, quite often with some pretext to try and hustle some cash out of them. Yeah, or and of course rehearsals and practices. But as I say, but a lot of the time he seemed to be the only one who'd turn up, or it seemed to be a real issue to actually get all four of them in the same place.
You mentioned in the book as well how when a rock star moved into your flat, you kind of expected him to be rich and have loads of money, but that wasn't the case, was it?
No, no. I mean, they weren't getting a lot more than we were getting signing on. I couldn't believe it. It was only like 25 quid a week that eventually got put up to 50. I mean, yeah, okay, there are other benefits like the taxi service, which was very useful. But yeah, sure. Again, you always think that stardom means that people are just sort of inundated with the trappings of success, but it was, it wasn't that way at all.
They were both obviously young when they died, and around at this time they were young as well, obviously. Um, would you say they were pretty, through the book, I got a sense they were like pretty childlike?
Yes, there was a kind of innocence and idealism about them, that a lot of their attitude, and so anger at people and society was just a fairly basic sort of, why are things so crap, why do people settle for this, or why do people live by these rules, that yeah and I think they both had an idea that children were kind of, knew where it was at before they learned the kind of, or just all the adult crap of putting on a face and thinking what are the right attitudes to express and so on. But yeah, that there was that really yeah, like I say, quite idealistic side to them that I don't think they get credited for much. That Sid always just gets made out to be this kind of nihilistic, very destructive sort of guy.
The living arrangements, obviously, with two couples, was it hard at times?
Yes, yeah, it was that. Just from kind of practical things that people's stuff, just there were always things that were getting mislaid and lost and so on. Yeah, and and again, there's times when you do just want a bit of privacy. As I say, ultimately, I think it got to me more than the others, that I've always had a thing, still do, that I like to have a certain amount of time to myself, just things I like doing, like just reading, or just looking out the window. So sometimes, and yeah, in the end, I found it quite oppressive, that and claustrophobic, just being in this one room with three other people, that day and night, 24/7. Yeah, and just used to go out for long walks on my own for a couple of hours. As I say in the book, the others were sure that I was going off, sort of secretly scoring somewhere else. Yes, or getting up to some mischief, and saying, "Well, no, I just walked up to Hampstead Heath and sat on a bench for half an hour." It was,
you mentioned in the book as well, like when you're on these drugs, you want to stay in really, you don't want to go out much and stuff. But when you did go out with them, what was that like?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was like the X-ray specs gig was. Yeah, was well, again was really strange. Just from the buzz of like being on the guest list and being so 'cause I'd been to the marquee loads of times before, seeing bands. But it was great being on the guest list and being waved in by the and stuff like that, and then and then realizing that shit, we're the center of attention. It Yeah, it was. I mean, again, it was interesting seeing the contrast between you get one lot of people want to be who were like sort of too cool to notice that it was Sid and Nancy, and on the other hand, so like all these sort of Scandinavian tourists sort of frantically snapping away, trying to taking pictures, which like I say, I wish I wish one of those pictures of us all zonked out on the couch at the marquee would surface. I still think it might one day, but who knows?
Yeah, hopefully. Um, when you're out with Sid Vicious and Nancy, but especially Sid, is he different from when you're at home? Has he got to live up to Sid Vicious when he's out? Did it feel like that?
Yeah, yes, I think yes, there was more of a kind of not so much a swagger, but a bit of a kind of detachment that he kind of held himself a bit differently. That like he was, kind of expecting to be challenged in a way or to kind of assert him, or need to assert himself. But generally, he would chill out after a while if there wasn't a problem. And I mean, a classic example of that, would be when we went to the burger joint on Fulham Road, and this guy suddenly comes up with this story about a punk broke the glass door last week and trying to get Sid to pay for it, which I'm sure a lot of people's view of Sid, they'd have be expecting him to have lost it, but he was just really calm. He just laughed it off and just said, "Well, if you think that, call the cops." Um, and just really fronted the guy out and just made him look pretty silly. And without any aggression or getting physical in any way.
Would you ever see him getting antagonized while you were out?
No, not while we were out. I mean, as I said, it wasn't like I was out with them all the time. Again, though, with the taxi service, their kind of time of kind of as it were, public exposure and a kind of uncontrolled space didn't happen that that much. I mean, this was I think around the time, say, when Johnny Rotten was attacked a couple of times, and Paul Cook. But I mean, Sid wasn't into kind of going down the pub or sort of living in public like that.
Do you think living with you, he like that sort of brought him back to some normality than when he's out and he's got fans coming up and then he's back home and he can be himself?
Yeah, I mean, there was a sense that that he was on as Sid most of the time. But he came to realize that he was in a safe space at ours. That although we had a few people coming around wanting to meet them, that we weren't people who were going to start leaking stories to the press or anything like that, which was the real sort of paranoia of theirs, that of lots of people who want to be friendly and then be running off to the papers, saying, "Oh, Sid Vicious drug sensation," or whatever.
What did you think of dynamic of their relationship?
That's quite a difficult one because I'd say having had another nearly 50 years of life experience and relationships and so on myself, I can see now that there was a lot of it that was pretty unhealthy. In terms, I don't think I was aware of terms like codependency then, but their relationship did fit that kind of pattern quite a lot. I mean, there was no question, of the basic fact that they were crazy about each other and had this real sort of passionate commitment. But in some ways, I'd say, it was a bit of a kind of self-enclosed sort of dead end in a way that always had this tendency to implode on itself. And this very sort of strange kind of ritual they had of bringing each other down as much as possible, and then kind of to the but then kind of building up from kind of ground zero after that. It's hard to explain, and again, I think things changed as time went on. Nancy got more confident, but also kind of more aware of how that of this battle of pushing her to the outside of the pistols situation. And as I say, by the time they're at Pindock News and they're actually starting to get some money coming through, that was when I felt Sid really changed and started to kind of believe his own publicity, and which again impacted on their relationship. That there seemed to be more it seemed to be, the violence seemed nearer to the surface, and and it was kind of more serious when it happened.
There's a bit when we'll get onto it soon, but you went and lived with them for a bit once they moved out of your place. Would
Yeah.
and there's a bit where it gets a bit violent then, but would there ever be violence at yours?
No, well, not so much between them as I say. There was a time with between Sid and this guy Alan, who he had a ruck with before, and suddenly turned up. But that was something that I'd said to Sid pretty early on, that it's cool, you stay here, but don't just don't attract attention. Don't bring trouble here. Which for the most part worked out okay.
You mentioned in the book as well, you'd get like people coming in that wouldn't usually like. I forgot the guy's name in the book, but like he tried to be mates with you when you didn't get on before, just so he could get close to
Oh
Sid.
yeah.
You get that a lot.
Oh sure. Yeah, quite a lot, and quite a lot of times we just had to say to people, no, sorry, don't. When they say, oh, it'd be great to come around, we just say, no, don't. It's really, I think you say now, kind of disrespecting them, that I didn't want to have. I did, people just coming and gawping at them. As I say, that particular guy Gilly, he was around the house anyway. He was always upstairs at the dealer's place, and he was just a very that's it. He was very very pushy and really I think he had this idea that he'd meet Sid and Nancy and immediately become part of the Pistols inner circle. That as I say, he was a bit of a rich kid with that's okay. Let's say we were mostly scuffling around. Or say his dad had been a big star in South Africa, and just he had everything paid for, and I think he thought he'd just sort of sweeps it, Sid and Nancy up in his wake, but that didn't really happen.
This was at the peak of the Sex Pistols, really. Like the singles, the third single came out, "Holidays in the Sun," uh, and then the album came out. So, would he talk about the Pistols a lot, or would that be like he'd leave that on the outside?
No, no, no. Talked about the group a lot, and when I met them, it was just before Holidays in the Sun came out, and I mean, he was just so excited about that. That this was the first one that he'd been, really completely involved in, and yeah, that's it. They just had bags and carrier bags full of copies of the single and badges and Holidays in the Sun T-shirts, all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, and I said, and then the album came out while they were at our place. Yeah, yes, Sid was really, very, committed and idealistic about the group, and again, it's something I make a point of, that that he actually used to spend quite a lot of time practicing every day. There's a lot of people who've made it, who make out, oh, Sid didn't know one end of the bass from another, and or else people getting very serious about saying, oh, it's Steve Jones or somebody else who actually plays bass on this or that track. But yeah, who knows? So there's different views. But no, I mean, Sid was really serious about it.
Did he never say anything about the album, like that it was on the album or not to you?
No, no, um, no. I'm sure, as far as he was concerned, he was.
We mentioned this is a peak of the Sex Pistols, and we mentioned like people had come up to him. There's a bit in the book where young fans come up and ask him for like autographs and stuff,
Yeah,
and then you say that Nancy kind of pushes in and everybody kind of ignores her. Do you think she wanted to be a celebrity as much as he was?
yeah. Yes, I think in a way, and there was this, kind of us against the world, that was the idea of seeing themselves as this little kind of small unit, where they were, tight together, and in like with the kind of the Dolls, Heartbreakers, New York little clique that she'd come over with, and and then moving it to the Pistols, yeah, where there was yeah, just with this idea again, this slightly kind of New York Andy Warhol sort of thing, of where there's this whole kind of entourage of cool people who, some of them do more than others, but they're all kind of part of the scene. Yeah, and I felt, I think she felt that she, in the early days, had been the one to, really give Sid a kick up the arse to work, work at playing his bass, and not just kind of go along for the ride.
John Lydon said before he regrets bringing him into the band because obviously what happened after, and he thinks that played a role in it and stuff. Do you think he did have pressures of the band on him and having to be Sid Vicious, like we said before?
Um, yeah, I guess so. I mean, when you think about it, the whole situation, and imagine, being 18 or 19, and just like living in squats, and drifting around, going to gigs and hanging out with your mates, and then suddenly being propelled into sort of, global recognition, and front page news. That again, now I'm, a lot more forgiving than I probably used to be. Just thinking, well, no wonder it fucking went to his head a bit in the end. It was ridiculous. It was like an unimaginable situation, and yeah, and I do still have a feeling that he was, pretty much exploited and not really, helped out when it led to the things that it did.
You mentioned in the book that you slept with Nancy a few times.
Yeah.
Um, do you would that happen a lot with them two? Do you think? Do you think they would be seeing different people? And
Um, yeah, I'm not particularly into talking about this side of it, but you've asked, so fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of times. Um, they had a pretty open relationship. I mean, I knew there were other people who she slept with during that time. Whether Sid got up to anything in his times away on his own, I don't know.
what was it like when they moved out of your flat? Then was you kind of not glad that they'd gone, but that you had this free space again, or did you miss them?
Um, yeah, to begin with, I was quite relieved just to actually have some space back at last. But then it does sort of turn, basically there. After that, it didn't take long before my girlfriend started just getting on a complete downer about, oh, it's so boring, it's nothing, there's nothing happening, and and just that was beginning. That was the beginning of the process of us, um, falling apart. That was lead to breaking up. Not long after. But yes, she really liked things like having the taxi service on call and stuff like that, and after that it was always this moaning about, oh, it's really boring, and that was somehow my fault.
Well, you left your girlfriend and went and stayed with them in their new place. What was that place like?
Well, their place.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I say it was this little flat, but with the spare room. And again, they used to spend most of their time in their room, which they painted black, but just had this big TV at the end of the bed. Um, yeah, and as I say, it was a it was a nice place. Um, Although I say it could get quite noisy with the was it the paint spray shop down below underneath that would get pretty noisy during the day. But yeah, it was a nice flat. I
Was
think
it?
it belonged to Tony James from Generation X before.
All right, yeah. Was the day-to-day living the same as what it was back at yours?
Um, Pretty much so, except by then Sid had been put on a huge methadone script that Virgin were paying for. So so there wasn't the urge, the thing of having to rush out and get money and score every day. That scoring was a bit more of a luxury. That didn't. Yeah, but pretty similar that. Sid would go off on pistols business of some sort or another, where Nancy wasn't welcome to go generally. In that sense, she and I would be back at the house. Like, so sometimes used to answer fan mail and stuff, which was cool.
Did you enjoy your time living there then, back with them two again?
Um, I don't know about enjoy, because, as I say, my personal situation was that I just had a 4 or 5 year relationship blow up, and equally again it was I was it had always been my flat, but I'd been the one who'd moved out and so on. Yeah, so my life was really in flux. I knew it wasn't going to be a permanent arrangement to live at Sid and Nancy's. um, yeah, so I felt plus equally I was really struggling to keep my drug situation together at the time. So, you know, so then suddenly being homeless didn't help with that. Yeah, no, it was a really pretty unsettling time, and
Was that the first you really saw of the violence between them then?
yes, definitely. Yeah, as I say, there'd been the odd sort of scuffle when they were at our place, but then there it tended more to be just the raised voices and shouting. Whereas I say particularly the incident where where he fucking whacked her across the head and cut her scalp open. Oh yeah, that was really horrible, um, and showed how things have moved on. Again, just like little things that he'd started getting this quite creepy kind of fascination with knives and things, and he was always buying these little lock knives and flick knives and showing them off, and I thought, you know, that's not a good sign.
Well, the last time you saw them, he threatened you with a knife, didn't
Yeah, sure. So it all culminated in this, you know, typical stupid, row over money for drugs that I'd tick to a couple of £100 worth of gear, which I'd had to, obviously I'd still had to pay for to my people, and was just, saying to me, so come on, Sid, do the right thing, you. Um, but no, as somebody who I knew later, no one likes paying for drugs they've already taken, and he's really picked up this kind of thing from hanging out with people like Jack Thunders and Jerry Nolan of only mugs pay for drugs, so kind of thing. Yeah, and I was really kind of pissed off and sort of disappointed by his attitude because he had money by then. He could easily have sorted it out and said it ended up with Nancy giving him his bunch of freebie LPs to sell, which wouldn't have raised more than about 30 or 40 quid anyway. So, but yeah, as I say, that that was where I felt Sid's just started to kind of lose it, and again, also as with Sid and alcohol, that he'd really drunk when at our place it had just been drugs nearly 99% of the time. Where when I went to their place, there'd always be bottles of pills around and stuff. And I noticed that after a couple of drinks, he'd start getting quite leery, and and all of a sudden he'd be quite red, red in the face. That some people can drink any amount, and you barely know it. And other people, so like Sid, just one bottle, and suddenly he's sort of changed from being a quite easygoing guy who you're having a bit of a laugh with to say someone being like, oh, is likely to take offence any minute at what you've said, or suddenly challenge you over some really tiny little thing. And that was it. He got it into his head that in some way I was ripping him off. I was just trying to get a fraction back of what he owed me. So so that was it. But that's just sort of, like I say, typical. Too much junkie business. That's what always that's what comes with scenes like that.
Was that incident then with the knife like your final straw? You just got out of there then? That was
Yeah,
trying to get
sure.
out.
There was no, that was it. When someone's standing at the top of the stairs, and with a knife and with Nancy in between us, and it's that I knew, shit that this is over. Um,
Well, at the end of that year, Nancy did end up getting stabbed. Uh,
yeah,
do you still believe? I know it's all opinion and stuff, but
sure.
do you still believe it was Sid?
I think yes, I do. I do really. I mean, I know other people have ventured for it's sometimes quite plausible other theories, but like I say, I think often it is the simplest explanation that is that is true. And like I say, I just saw so much, casual violence between them, and things seem to be, which again seem to be stepping up. And yeah, when I read some sort of details of what had happened, that they'd been trying to, they'd, were basically in the situation like all dressed up and nowhere to go. They had some loads of cash, but couldn't find anyone holding to score off. So Sid was just taking loads of Tylenol, which are really heavy downers, and drinking, and they will give you a real kind of blackout where literally come round not with about 8 hours of lost time, not knowing what the fuck you've done then. And I could just see how in that situation, because quite often if they were both strung out, Nancy would quite often get into kind of goading him about sort of making too much fuss about being sick, or it somehow being his fault that they hadn't been able to score. So I could, as I say, if you factor in, the knife thing that had been going on for a while with him, I just find it very, very easy to see how that a situation could have, escalated. Like I say, but that is the sad and awful thing about it, that I'm sure he didn't mean to, but I genuinely think it's quite likely that he didn't, that he didn't know. He actually didn't know if he'd done it or not. Which must have been terrible.
It was his knife as well, on it, that was used.
I think, I think so. Yeah. No, as I say, there's lots of experts who come out with all this stuff about Neon Leon and Rocket's red glare, and various other mysterious people. Well, fair play, but as I say, that that's always been my view. That that it that it was him, and probably didn't mean to, but that's how it. That's it. If you start playing with knives.
When like you're with them and stuff, and you're seeing the drugs, and you know a lot of people that didn't make it out the other side with drugs and stuff. Did you always expect them to go down that road?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, in some ways, I thought that Sid might kind of make it through to be one of these people like kind of Richard Hell or something, who's made a bit of a got a name established, and can do enough to get by, and but equally, I always felt that in the end, Sid's habit would kind of get out of control and be too much for the business to handle. That if I that there were times sometimes when I try to imagine what was might Sid be doing musically in 10 years' time, and I just couldn't I couldn't really just because he'd never really particularly been into writing a lot of songs or anything. And so I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure how it could go.
Do you think the money changed him? You was mentioned it, like a little bit before. Did he change after the money came in? Then you think?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think that I think that's really understandable. Particularly as I say, if you're your teens, and you never had much money in your and suddenly it's all coming coming your way. It's natural. It's a bit and it's, that again, it's like I think Sid felt that once he, actually got the money too, that he was in a position where he could just tell people to fuck off when he wanted to. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
How do you look back on your time with them? Like, I'm sure when you're on drugs and in squats, you come across a lot of different people. But do you look back at them as friends or just people that you just came to know?
No, I guess I still think of them as friends, but it was a so, some most of your friends are people who you've known for you know years or whatever, and go through different things with. Where with them, it was very much like the whole punk thing. It was just like a bit of a brief flash where a lot of very intense stuff got crammed into a short period. And I mean, obviously, Sid and I didn't part as friends, but I think of him, yeah, in a context, yeah, and again, like you say, when you're in that kind of fairly fluid situation of squats and stuff, yeah, where you seem to submit, meet, just be meeting a lot of different people, and again, you find like quite a few of the people in Padlocks that they're all kind of outsiders in one way or another, and if you scratch beneath the surface, they all, tend to all have their story going on. Yeah, so I see that it's very, um, it's something that that I have a good feeling about now. Although I mean that was one of the reasons why it took me so long to get Padlocks out, was at times I felt, do I feel comfortable with um, trying to profit on or exploit what was actually a really bad time in my life, and and a bad not a good time for any of the people in that story, very much.
When did you find out about what happened to Nancy and then what happened to Sid?
Um, well, by the time Nancy died, I'd ended up just crashing at my mum's a lot of the time, um, and that's it. I just got up one morning and went down for breakfast, and she said, "Oh, there was something about one of your friends on the radio." And I thought, and I was a bit like, "Oh, yeah, right." And yeah, and then and then about half an hour later, I heard, yeah, in a way, I was shocked, but in another way, you know, it, it just it wasn't a surprise that I'd had a feeling that there was some, when they left for New York, that it wasn't going to have a good ending. That his idea that he was going to be there and welcomed as this kind of homecoming punk hero. Yeah, and and again, it was pretty much the same with Sid a few months later. Again, yeah, I forget how I heard exactly, but yeah, sure. It is. It is shocking when it's people but you're just hearing about it on the radio or whatever.
Sid's mum gets blamed for his death. Did you ever see his mum?
No, no, I never met her. I mean, in my experiences, so he had a really disrespectful attitude towards her, and kind of blamed her for his habit, and that saying that his memories from childhood were just always her shooting up or being wanting to kind of him to sort of not bother her because she was too stoned and couldn't be bothered. Plus she, as once it got kind of posted, she did seem to really be out to cash in a lot on the connection. But no, as I say, I never met her myself.
with Sid and Nancy, they've got this like poster couple attention thing, and like the Sid as a celebrity couple. Do you think that's dangerous?
Um, I guess it is in a way if people think that that that's the way to be. That all the sort of live fast, die young stuff. Might yeah. I guess yes. I guess that yeah, there is that aspect to it.
What is your favourite memory of those two with the time spent with them?
Um, I don't know. Probably it's kind of early on thing. Just things like the first night, or just so just set up. Just talking and playing music. All the Fulham Road meal. Yeah, yes, probably something like that.
So with the book you wrote about your time with them, Padlocks we've mentioned. What was it like actually writing it?
It was something I started writing first ages ago because a couple of friends of mine kept on saying, "Oh, you should write these stories down," and I just thought, I don't know if anyone's that interested really. And then eventually I did start writing and took a very early draft of the book to a friend introduced me to a fairly mainstream publisher. They liked it and then said, "Yeah, go ahead with this, but there's too much drug taking. Can you edit some of that out?" And I said, "Well, no, like if you're writing a book about four addicts, that I said no, in a way that's one of the points of the book that it is deliberately made repetitive just to kind of hammer home to people, that's what it's like, just the same fucking thing day after day, and so on." Yeah, then yeah, I just went through various other ventures that never quite came together. And I was in the end, I decided to bring it out myself with a couple of people I'd met who were into the sort of design side of things. Then lockdown happened, and so that put an end to that. And yeah, and then really it all just came together very suddenly. That I have a friend, Melanie Smith, who I used to work with on the Mudkiss online zine for years. She'd been talking to somebody she knew, Simon Spence in Manchester, who told her about that he was involved in setting up this Backstage Books, and were looking for any original music related material. Did she know anyone? And yeah, so she told me, and I'd had kind of offers like that before, and again over the years, like Padlocks had evolved, and I had three or four different drafts of it, and by then I'd kind of read a few chapters on the radio and stuff, so I tended to say, "Oh well, I need time to sort out which is the completed version and stuff." But for that time, I just decided, "Oh well, I'm just going to set." I looked for what was the longest version I had saved, and thought, right, I'm sending that. I'm just going to send that off and see what happens. Yeah, and that was it. It was only a matter of days later that Simon got back saying, "Look, we want to do this," and so and from then on, it all just happened really quickly. Backstage had it, printed and on sale, within a month or so. So that yeah, that was great because I admit I find that the kind of business side of it, or because I'm quite difficult and wasn't keen on, I've got a few friends like me and Antonia who had books published, but when I'd start talking and saying, "Look, what do you do about agents and stuff like that?" And I found it really off-putting. And again, with the self-publishing thing, it was just all too complicated. I'm not into deciding how, what margin size, or, you want the page, or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it was great. And again, it was a bit like being kind of signing to an indie label that I've got complete artistic freedom. I knew that there wasn't going to be anyone coming to me saying, "Oh, can you change this, or can you leave that out, or whatever." It was like, respect. This is this this is what you wrote. Um, go with the whole thing. You know, um, where so I don't get some of the things you'd get from if I was with a proper publisher, that they'd be doing more of the PR stuff, and which but for I much prefer this way of working, and hopefully we'll be doing something else together with some short stories of mine,
Yeah.
and yeah, and maybe after that I used to I used to be friends and work with a guy called Alex Trocky, one of the beat writers from the 50s and early 60s, to write something about that.
You enjoy writing?
Yeah, I do. I find it hard. It's hard work. It doesn't come easy. There are friends of mine who I really envy, who you know can't stop themselves writing. Or can be quite disciplined about saying, right, I I have sort of 12 to 6 o'clock is my writing time every day, and in the evening I go through what I've written and so on. Where I'm much more the kind of temperamental artist that kind of everything has to be right. There's no distractions, and have to be in the right the right mood, and maybe get the right music on or whatever. Yeah. But then there are other times when kind of get in the zone, and it just in it the right the writing kind of takes over. That there's a couple of bits in Padlocks where where I still feel, I think, well, that, hey, that's pretty good. The I'd say the uninvited chapter, or the stranger in blue suede shoes. Yeah, you think, yeah, that's, yeah, I stand by that.
With the book, like you mentioned, the main theme in it is the drugs. What was your journey like? Like, how did you come off of the heroin? How long after this?
I mean, I carried on doing it for a good few years afterwards, really, till the mid 80s. But really with diminishing returns, and just getting more and more into the thing of being registered on methadone, but some clinics wanting to reduce you all the time. And I think eventually I just kind of grew out of it. Didn't it just didn't appeal to me anymore, and it stopped. I just wasn't getting any of the sides that I liked about it. And again, like I say in the book, I just got more and more fixated on the kind of alarm clock ticking aspect of it. That it was all that you always want sort of how long till I have to fucking do this all again. And yeah, so really I kind of stopped around sort of 84, 85. Would have the occasional little weekend dabble for a few years after that, but I mean, I haven't touched it or been near it for about 30 years now. Um,
So, what is life like for you these days? Obviously, you've got the book out over the last couple of years. What is life like for you now?
yeah, pretty good. I've a lovely partner, two, two beautiful dogs. Yeah, I, So yeah, obviously it's a completely different story, but I in the 90s had some really serious back trouble, which led to surgery, which actually made it worse.
Really?
Yeah, with the result that I got early retirement from work in the mid
Ah,
90s, which I've never never regretted for a second. That it's meant having a lot less money to live on, but I've never been bored for a minute. That there's reading, writing, music. I could easily fill my day, 2 or 3 times over. So so that's. I mean, now I am pretty much housebound, which is a drag. But no, I make I make the best of it, and yeah, and obviously, obviously it's been great that the last year, 18 months with Padlocks taking off. Just feeling what you're doing is worthwhile. That you're not. You're not just indulging some little sort of trip of your own, and I can kind of feel now that there's been a continuation over about 10 years from first starting to do things with Melanie and Mudkiss, and that led to doing things on the radio and making connections through there too. You're thinking, well, actually, yeah, that this really can work doing it as a book, and
yeah.
that's led to a lot more connections, and just when you get that kind of validation thing where you realize that people are liking what you do.
Well, like I said before, there's a lot of books and documentaries on them, but this is a different insight into them as a couple and life with them and stuff. What it's like
Yeah,
living with them, really.
sure. And I mean, to be honest, I've been surprised at how positive all the reaction has been, because there has always been this huge nauseating Nancy faction out there, and again, a lot of people who blame her for Sid dying and the Pistols breaking up. And okay, I've had a couple of 1 and 2 star ratings on Amazon that are obviously from people who don't like that side of it. But no, but the majority of reaction, has really picked up on the fact that it's it isn't a press cutting's job. This I'm talking about stuff that really happened. Um,
Yeah.
in close detail, and yeah, that's it. And which I do think is kind of different to most of what's been written before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if there is anybody watching that would like a copy of the book, I'll leave a link in the description so you can check
Okay,
it
that's
out and
great. Thanks.
get a copy. But yeah, thank you for your time, Dennis. It's been great to speak to you and
Brilliant. Yeah,
hear,
thank you. Good
hear all about.
questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you.